Excellent. All right. Well, yes, let us get started here. We have a lot to cover. We're really excited to be doing a little bit of a recap here once we get through some introductions and grounding and welcomes. So if you weren't at last week's session, we have a way to touch on those terms. And then we'll go a little bit deeper, talking on our commitment and work to be inclusive and really how we can all work together to help realize that. We will have a break in there, and we will certainly make sure to have plenty of room for group discussion, hearing from others, and yeah, making sure this is a collaborative process as we're learning with you all as well tonight. So with that, I want to start with the diversity welcome. Today, we welcome people from all over the state. We welcome older people and younger people. We welcome people of all colors, cultures, ethnicities, and religions. We welcome people of all sexual and gender orientations, identities, and expressions. We welcome diversity, all that makes us unique and also what makes us the same. Thank you again, everyone. I'm going to start with some introductions here, and I'm going to pass it to my colleague here, Bobby.
Thank you, Chelsea. Hi, everybody. My name is Bobby Mooney, and I am the Beyond Oil and Gas Campaign Coordinator with 350 Colorado. And I'm going to kick off our introductions this evening, including inviting speakers to share a visual description of themselves when introducing themselves. A visual description is a way for individuals to describe their physical appearance and provide helpful contextual information. These descriptions are voluntary, but can help with eliminating unconscious bias and help with navigating social situations. And visual descriptions specifically benefit people who are blind, that have low vision, or that otherwise have vision loss. So I'll introduce myself again. My name is Bobby Mooney. I use she, her pronouns. I live in the Denver area, and a visual description of myself is I'm a middle-aged white woman with brown hair that's chin length, and I am wearing a black jacket tonight, and I use glasses. And with that, I will pass it over to Chelsea.
Thank you, Bobby. Yes, I am Chelsea Alexander. I use she, her, aya pronouns. I work as the movement building and volunteer director with 350 Colorado. I live in Golden, Colorado, have for a little over 2 years. And my inclusivity descriptors include I'm a white woman in her early 30s. I have short blonde hair that's half pulled back tonight. And I am wearing a black sweater with horizontal stripes. I'm going to pass it to Sarah.
Hi, my name is Sarah. I am the Northern Colorado team coordinator for 350. I use she, her pronouns, and my visual description is that I am a young woman in my 20s. I have straight brown hair with a little bit of pink in it, and I am wearing a multicolored floral cardigan, and I will pass it to Sierra.
Hi, I'm Sierra. I use she, her pronouns. I work as the communications coordinator for 350 Colorado. I live in Colorado Springs, and my visual description is that I am a white woman in my late 20s with long brown hair, wearing a gray shirt, and I use glasses. I'll pass to Matt.
Hi, everybody. My name is Matt Gose. I am the Roaring Fork team coordinator, and I am based out of Newcastle, Colorado. My visual description is a white man in his early 20s. I have dirty blonde hair, and I'm wearing a blue Patagonia sweatshirt. I guess, yeah, I'll call it blue. It's closer to green. I don't know. Sorry. I'll pass it over to Katessa.
Hi everyone, my name is Katessa. I use they, she pronouns. I am on the board of directors for 350 Colorado, and I live in Denver. My visual description is I have brown hair, wear glasses, and am non-binary.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone. And we heard from Alejandro earlier, so thank you for introducing yourself and getting that grounding for us. And speaking of grounding, we really hope that these workshops as a two-part series, our first part being last week, we hope that they really are gifts and grounding and concepts of inclusive organizing, ones you may be familiar with, ones that are new, that could involve some unlearning and some learning and coming together and vulnerability and trust to really see those blind spots as well. Hopefully you can also leave with some tools that really just ensure as individuals and a movement, we're as inclusive as possible. And all of that leading to just a better understanding of the ways that you and us and everyone can support inclusive organizing in the ways you already do and the ways that you may also come to. So we would be off the mark if we didn't also take a pause here to really settle into an acknowledgement and a lot of gratitude as well. First, a very big thank you to Angela Davis of iProject LLC. She worked with us last year in introducing a lot of this content. And the leaders here today and others that were a part of this process have really taken that material and ran further with it. So we acknowledge that these two workshops have been partially developed by a leadership team that carries many different identities of privilege. And we understand that this perspective may resonate most with privileged allies and accomplices. However, it's our sincere hope that allies, accomplices, activists, and organizers of all backgrounds will find the content valuable and applicable. And last but certainly not least, a huge thank you, muchas gracias, to the Community Language Cooperative, incredible local group working with interpreters and translators, furthering language justice, as we heard about, and the incredible interpreters that worked with us last week and here tonight again. So true deep appreciation for your support and being here to make this work as impactful as possible. I will pass it to my colleague here, Matt, to set the stage for us as a group tonight as we learn, unlearn, and do many things.
Thanks, Chelsea. So a lot of you that were here last week, similarly to that, we're going to go over some expectations of our container agreements. And the goal of these are to create a safe and nurturing environment that values and supports all members and helps us all to grow and learn together. In order to do this, we're going to go over what you can expect from us as facilitators. You can expect us to listen and be judgment-free, to show patience, to explain to the best of our ability and admit when we may not have an answer, to be honest and open. And if there's anything else, feel free to raise a hand or drop in the chat if you feel there's anything else that we should be held accountable to. And we'll give a minute for that to let it breathe. All right. And then I guess secondly, what we're going to ask of you all as attendees. So please put an asterisk in the chat or raise your hand literally or using the Zoom function when you wish to speak. Being okay with being vulnerable and honest, maybe even in front of strangers. Come with an open mind and lean into your curiosity. Speak from your own experiences and not from the experiences of others. Ask for what you need, to be on camera when you can and when you're comfortable to ask questions. And once again, if there's anything else, feel free to mention it. And then lastly here is what we can expect from each other. First is to make sure that everyone has a chance to speak who wishes to and to not talk over each other, to actively listen to understand and be willing to consider views different from your own, a willingness to drop your mask and show your humanness. And yeah, for the last time, if there's anything else that you guys would like to say. And Yes, and Chelsea has that in the chat there, just a reminder for those that are bilingual. With that, I will pass it back to Chelsea to cover a little bit of a recap.
Thank you, Matt. Yeah, if anyone else thinks of anything else to add to those group expectations, kind of container agreements, please drop it in the chat. So yes, quick recap for further just shared understanding. We use shorthand JEDI to describe what is justice, equity, diversity, inclusion. And, these are more than principles and values, really, at the end of the day. It's how we're showing up for ourselves and one another. We're dismantling systems of oppression that are deeply intersected and intertwined with the climate crisis. It's really that future that we envision, right? Something based in justice and equity, something for everyone. But of course, these workshops have taken that deep dive focus within inclusivity, which this shared definition here, the act of creating environments in which all people are welcomed, respected, supported, valued to participate and contribute, and can bring their full potential. I really want people to be their authentic selves. This movement, this climate crisis that we're in demands that. And the best work and the best solutions is really going to unfold when we feel we can be all of those things together, right? No, that's the case for me. So if anyone has any questions, you're welcome to drop in the chat, but I'm going to pass it to my friend Katessa.
Thanks, Chelsea. How 350 Colorado cultivates an inclusive culture is through the GEMA's principles of organizing. I'm going to go ahead and send the PDF in the chat if you all want to go more into depth with this. And we did go over it last time as well, but I want to give a little bit more context this time since we have some more time and you all already heard about this last time. So the first paragraph states, on December 6th through 8th, 1996, 40 people of color and European American representatives met in Gemma's, New Mexico for the Working Group Meeting on Globalization and Trade. The Gemma's meeting was hosted by the Southwest Network for Environmental and Economic Justice with the intention of hammering out common understandings between participants from different cultures, politics, and organizations. The following Gemma's principles for democratic organizing were adopted by the participants. And those principles are: number 1, to be inclusive; number 2, to have an emphasis on bottom-up organizing; number 3, to let people speak for themselves; number 4, to work together in solidarity and mutuality; number 5, to build just relationships among ourselves; and number 6, have a commitment to self-transformation. And we open any other ideas for cultivating inclusive culture through 350 as well. And with that, I will pass it over to Bobby.
Thank you, Katessa. I'm going to share some recap from last week's workshop, specifically some key terms that you see there on the screen. I'm going to move through these and give a little reminder of their definitions and their relevance to us in this workshop. So first up is ethnocentrism. Ethnocentrism is the tendency for individuals to place their own group, ethnic, racial, or cultural, at the center of their observations of others and the world. The next term is prejudice. Prejudice, the screen flips. Prejudice is unfounded opinions, attitudes, or beliefs relating to an individual or group that represents them in an unfavorable light. So a negative, unfounded opinion or attitude is a prejudice. Next, we have the term privilege, which is an advantage held by a person or a group based on their age, race, ethnicity, gender, class, or another cultural dimension which gives power over others. When we're thinking about privilege, it's important to recognize that each of us holds privileged identities and possibly marginalized identities. So it's crucial to identify your own privileges where they exist and think critically about how we show up in the world with that privilege. Next up is another term in this vein is the word bias. Bias is an inflexible, conscious or unconscious, positive or negative belief about a specific category of people. It can also be defined as a disproportionate weight in favor of or against an idea, person, or thing, but usually in a way that is closed-minded, prejudicial, or unfair. So it's a negative belief or opinion or favor or lack thereof. And the next word that we have is stereotype. Stereotypes are an exaggerated belief, image, or distorted truth about a person or a group. A generalization that allows for little or no individual differences or social variation. So thinking about stereotypes, we probably can all think of examples of common stereotypes, right? Whether it's about a certain culture or a social group, like moms, for example, one group that I fall into, or a racial group, or a gender, or religion. But every stereotype is fundamentally flawed and harmful because they ignore differences between the individuals of that group, right? Not all moms are the same. And instead, the stereotype just paints everyone with the same broad brush of negative assumptions. So all of these terms I've just covered, ethnocentrism, prejudice, privilege, bias, stereotype, these are important terms as we're learning about inclusivity. And there are ways that we can combat and challenge and dismantle these terms and concepts. The way I like to say it is be curious, be humble, and be courageous. So more specifically, when I say be curious, I mean build your own knowledge of these terms and these factors that affect us all in our society and in our communities. And use your own mindfulness to recognize when they are impacting the behavior of yourself or others. So be curious and start with curiosity to learn more to understand how things like prejudice or bias might be operating. And then secondly, be humble. And I think this is an especially important point for those who do carry privileged identities in different contexts. So we want to listen to those with firsthand experience first and foremost and follow their lead. So for example, I may have opinions about an issue in another area outside of my own neighborhood, or an issue affecting folks from a different gender or race than my own. But my thoughts and my opinions are of lower importance than those who are living there in that other neighborhood or experiencing that different identity in their everyday life, right? So therefore, it's my role to trust them and follow their lead in how to address the problems. And finally, be courageous. So with curiosity and humility always guiding you, aim to speak up when you notice instances of prejudice or bias or stereotypes operating. You can call in folks when they are behaving in a way that is guided by prejudice or bias, for example. Or you can call out in a more public manner when necessary to stop or prevent further harm. But it's important that we're leading that courageous conduct with both curiosity and humility. And if you do have privilege, you have a privileged identity, this is a way that you can actually use your privilege for good. So in a context where you hold a privileged identity, for example, in some instances, my identity as a mother can be a privilege, and I can use that privilege to for good by using it to be a strong ally to others or accomplices to help dismantle systems that give privilege and oppression. And so all of that to say leads me to my last recap point for this week, which is about psychological safety. And I think this is all connected because psychological safety refers to an environment that encourages, recognizes, and rewards individuals for their contributions and ideas by making individuals feel safe when taking what can be interpersonal risks. So it's creating an environment where people can show up as their whole selves and be valued and recognized. A lack of psychological safety can inhibit a team from learning and bonding, and it can lead to problems like in-groups or group thinking and blind spots. So we want to create psychological safety in our spaces. It's a critical component of creating an inclusive space. Ways to create psychological safety may include deep listening, authentic sharing, giving constructive feedback, disagreeing respectfully, and welcoming different viewpoints and acknowledging folks for sharing those different viewpoints. And what it feels like, what psychological safety feels like, is authenticity, feeling listened to and truly heard, and genuine collaboration, and the space and the grace to show up as the best versions of ourselves. So that's what we're aiming to create here in our organizing spaces. And with that, I think I'm handing it over to Chelsea.
Or even my friend Sierra.
So the next section of the workshop, we are going to get into the core content tonight. And first, we're going to talk about language justice and then eliminating barriers to participation, addressing interpersonal issues within teams, inclusive organizing, and then youth leadership. And one really quick note that I want to say before we start getting into tonight's content is we are trying our best to be inclusive in all the ways that we can, and we've been focusing in these key areas, but we recognize that there are many ways to be inclusive, and we must continue to honor and celebrate these principles. So we'll be covering challenges we face in each area, and we hope to hear from you and your thoughts and how we can overcome some of these challenges too. So with that, I will pass over to Chelsea for language justice.
Thank you, Sierra. Yes, language justice, kicking us off here. This is something I feel so privileged to talk about because I'm so passionate about language justice. Yeah, so I'll try to keep some things succinct where I can. But our commitment to language justice is really ensuring that we're providing bilingual accessible everything, right? Workshops, spaces, events, resources. And there is also a higher level goal as it comes to that when it looks like expanding languages that are available. We have Spanish represented tonight, so wonderful. But had we had someone else in need of a different language, we may really not have been quite as prepared. I think it's really neat. I don't know how many folks know this here already, but there are more than 200 languages that are represented in the Denver public school system. And that's just Denver, right? How many other parts of Colorado might bump that number up considerably higher? And thinking of the tens of thousands, if not even maybe hundreds of thousands of people that are speaking other languages at home, it really just helps illustrate, again, how much more important it is that we be prioritizing language justice. And to give more of a general just description too of what we mean when we say language justice, it's a key practice used in social justice movements in order to create a shared power, that shared grassroots people power, to really practice inclusion, as we're talking about in this moment, and to ultimately, dismantle those traditional systems of oppression that we know have traditionally disenfranchised non-English speakers. English might be the official language here, but that says nothing to people that immigrate here, people that are in a refugee crisis, people that have other languages spoken at home. So just for example, besides Spanish, the state has plenty of Arabic speakers, French speakers, Mandarin, Nepali, Vietnamese. Really covers a lot of ground. So it'd be very neat to see an expansion in that way. Not to mention all of the indigenous native languages that are still spoken and have systems upholding them. Yes, Bonnie?
I want to add something I just learned at Boulder's Indigenous Peoples Day about indigenous languages, and that is that their languages, when people can come back and relearn them, it's actually part of healing, personally and collectively, because those languages connect them in a very particular way to the land and to the cosmos. And I was quite surprised to learn just how important those languages are. And so one of the things that needs to happen, for instance, at CU, is the inclusion of Arapaho, Cheyenne, Ute, and other, languages that people need to be relearning.
Mm-hmm. So well said. I'm so glad you shared that. I very much so resonate with that. Language is so connective and healing and storytelling, so many other things. That's great. We might add that to our next slide here that we'll be on in just a second. Your head's in the right place. The challenges here when it comes to really ensuring the language justice pieces of things, this is not an exhaustive list. These are just some things that we've ran into. And part of that is funding, right? When it comes to having really great interpretation and translation services there, you've got to, of course, have some funding to cover that and give people a livable wage. So getting grants, donations, things like that, and taking care of that ahead of time, while also learning about the many different kinds of processes and preferences that different interpreters or translators like or want. Taking time outside of your event to figure that out, perhaps, and getting to know one another even. And sometimes that also stems into this third point here of just getting past feeling awkward or uncomfortable, especially if you are a monolingual speaker and it feels intimidating to be in a space in which language delays could happen or miscommunications could happen. But really leaning in with that curiosity and humility, I think is important. And one small note I'll add here is that someone really pointed out to me recently how I never even considered, actually, so speaking of ethnocentrism earlier, when we have put on events in the past, we have Spanish interpretation, somewhat like tonight. But what about instances of having English interpretation for the English speakers, so native speakers can participate even more freely? Blew my mind open. I'm talking about a blind spot. It's such a great idea, and I would love to see that happen next year. So, somebody to hear from y'all a little bit here. Get your creative juices flowing. We're going to go into edit mode in the slides. These are just a few examples of how language justice has been realized in our organizing. And between providing resources like bilingual toolkits, a Spanish micro website, which we'll include in the follow-up toolkit that we'll share with y'all. But just really making sure to be the squeaky wheel, so to speak, that when there is not that bilingual accessibility in the regulatory meeting, into the meeting with the legislator, whatever it might be, where can we push? Where can we push and provide and find a way to remedy that so that there can be full participation? So what else can we do? Feel free to come off mute, to drop it in the chat. I'm going to go into edit mode here. What else comes to mind when you think about furthering language justice? What challenges?
Something that I think about is related to what Bonnie shared, and the notion of indigenous to me is really impactful. And it's like we throw it around, but we don't acknowledge that in a way we're all indigenous to the earth, and it's a reconnection to that channel that indigenous traditions or cultures of this Turtle Island represent. And in order for all of us to reconnect, we almost have to go back through those languages that they're available, and we're not accessing them. And they're the second tier. And English and Spanish are one tier. They're a European tier, which is not a bad tier, but it doesn't connect us to the earth the way indigenous languages qualified as part of our DNA or our consciousness that needs to be reconnected. And how do we do that? It's like, we can't do it all. How do we focus our attention on what needs to be held by all of us?
Yes, thank you, John. John and my teammates, if I don't capture things right, please, you're welcome to come in here with me. What else? Maybe one to two more things from anybody? So we know we're not covering the whole swatch, and I'm sure of what could be done.
Something that kind of came to my mind was, I think about, sometimes, and this could just be a small thing, but yeah, I just think promotional efforts. Sometimes when you're trying to, create outreach for events, right? And a lot of those promotional materials are only in English. Right off the bat, you're excluding a chunk of people that, may not be aware of what's even going on. Even if there is, Spanish translation, for example, at the event you're holding, if your promotional efforts aren't that, you're already excluding people. Just a little thought.
That's a good flag. Yes, Anna?
One thing that came to my mind was that when we talk about people who speak different languages, that we need to include them in the sense of they aren't refugees or they aren't immigrants, but they're actually just like you and me, and could be here for generations and generations and generations. And just because they're not speaking English doesn't make them part of our group or one of us.
That's a great distinction. yeah, and an easy slope for someone to slip into to assume there's not a long lineage and foundation of, yeah, many languages being spoken here. Capture the rest of that note. Lovely, thank you. And I see in the chat too, Bobby, what you dropped. That's great. Hire more staff who are native speakers of language other than English. Okay, great. Well, thank you, everyone. I got to be mindful of time and not take up too much space here. But again, language justice is so important, and the ways in which we further it will only make us a more and more inclusive movement for justice and a livable future. Come back. Awesome. Well, let me, with that, get us back into presentation mode, and I will pass it over to Matt.
All right. Thanks, Chelsea. Yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit here about removing some of the barriers that we have to participation. And beginning with that is our commitment that we are trying to make here, which is to remove barriers that prevent community members, especially those from disproportionately impacted communities, from participating in the movement. Barriers such as Zoom accessibility needs, creating spaces and messages that are accessible, especially to the target audience that you're trying to connect with, providing stipends, providing food, childcare, prize giveaways, toolkits for people, rides and carpool sharing, etc., things like that. We want to make sure that when we're hosting any kind of event, whether it's online or in person, that we're really ensuring that we're thinking of the accessibility of everyone, as many people as we can possibly include when we're planning these kinds of events. And with that, we try to practice mutual aid organizing. And what this can look like, and I guess a little just backstory or definition of what mutual aid organizing is. Mutual aid is an organizational model where voluntary collaborative exchanges of resources and services for common benefit take place amongst the community members to overcome physical, social, economic, and political barriers to meet common needs. Like I mentioned earlier, that can include food, medicine, clothing, breakfast programs, and education. Yeah, often built for daily needs of those in their communities. With that, we also face some challenges. Obviously, we try to address as many barriers as we can, and inevitably, I feel like sometimes small ones slip through the cracks. Not to say that some are small and some are large, but you don't always think of all of them. So if there are some that we ever feel like we're missing out on, or sometimes it's hard to realize from the inside here, we always encourage people to reach out to us to show how we can make our kinds of events more accessible. And then I guess another big challenge that you face sometimes is funding. Sometimes different programs there, a lot of them do require money, and occasionally that can be a barrier. But to move down here, we've got quite a few examples of the work we got here. So in 350 Colorado, we have localized and statewide efforts that allow people to contribute to the causes that are closest to them. Sometimes, sometimes people feel more attached to local events. Live time Spanish translation and translated resources at events, stipends or giveaways for attendees, food and drink, childcare for those who need it, closed captions on Zoom or recorded Zoom events, carpool organizing, identifying your target audience and writing in a manner that is accessible and easily understandable to them, and toolkits and talking points. All of these kind of examples that we've got down here, they encourage and try to break down those barriers of people to be able to be more involved. But with that, like I mentioned earlier, we are not hitting everything. So this is where I'm going to open the floor up to everybody and encourage anyone to speak up, raise their hand, type in the chat of what else we think that we could do, or what would it take along with that yeah, to break down as many barriers as we can and what's slipping through the cracks here. But yeah, I'll turn it over to you all. Yeah, Bonnie?
What occurs to me is that oftentimes things get offered, and I don't think this is happening so much with 350 at the moment with, for instance, this workshop. I felt that, I felt, for instance, that I could write to Chelsea, who emailed. But oftentimes, if, like if some of these places that ask for money, there are people who say, don't let money get in your way. Please contact this person, for example. I think that's really essential if money is involved. I know that I always have to ask for a special consideration, and most of the time I get it, which is wonderful. But the other thing is, if there's an invitation by a movement organization, and you're dealing with new people, it might be really great if there's a paragraph down at the bottom and say, are you slightly interested, and not quite sure, how to connect and enter in? Please contact this person. We'd be happy to talk with you.
Yeah, just I think that human connection a lot of the time too, to feel like you're not just, going through the motions there of trying to be like, well, how do I even get this off the ground kind of thing, is that, yeah, to feel like somebody cares, yeah. Thanks for sharing.
What else?
Awesome to get one or two more here, but obviously if we're saving a little time, then we're saving a little time. Just let everybody know we are planning a break after this, so if you've got any ideas, it's a great time to push them out right now. John?
Thank you. Something I've been conscious of and wanted to share is that different communities were spread out around the Colorado, the whole state. And I think we can be supportive of each other if we had a system of sharing events and experiences or upcoming practices that are occurring in our communities, and that we could rally involvement of larger groups or people who have expertise in areas that are lacking to be brought up in relation to 350's mission. And that being this inclusion, holism, or a different way of looking at the world than just through economics and whatever dominant culture. And for example, Estes Park, where I live, is hosting its first People's Festival on Martin Luther King Day in January of 24. And I approached the organizer and said, I'd like to help. And the first thing out of her mouth was to try to place me on a fundraising committee. And I explained to her, and I was I didn't handle it very well, but I said, I'm not interested in raising money. I would like to start by understanding what this event is about and what it wants to accomplish. And I think about a larger organization that could say, oh, Estes Park is recognizing first people of this continent or of this land. And how are they going to do that? What are they doing that brings the issues of first people to the foreground? Or is it about money? Is it about the creative elements of native cultures that will be brought to Estes Park and sold? And is that the point? And I frankly don't know, but I'm just bringing that up as an opportunity for organizers to say, oh, what's going on in Estes Park, or what's going on in Grand Junction, or what's going on in Denver, or how can we integrate our efforts to make a difference? And it's hard for one person in a small community to go up to the town board or the town city manager and say, hey, have you thought about this? But if we had an organization that could say, oh, look what's happening in Longmont or in, any little town or big town. But that's something I'd like to integrate our efforts as an environmental and cultural, respectful team of players all over the state working together.
Yeah, I'll just kind of hit the little first part here I kind of wanted to say, and then I'll pass it to Katessa. Yeah, one area that I feel like is a fantastic resource when it comes to figuring out where organized actions are being taking place throughout the state. I think of in the summer we hosted a June 10th actions event, and there were different events that were spread out all over the state, and I think we ran through the Colorado Action Network. And yeah, something like that, that's consistently has everything in one place, visualized on a map. I see what you're saying, where you can kind of see visually where things are happening and what exactly that event entails. But yeah, I'll pass it over to Katessa.
Yeah, I just wanted to echo John a little bit and add, I feel like, John, when you brought up the Estes Park, that community event example, I feel like you were wanting to be met where you were at, and the organization didn't really do that for you. So I think it's just really important to meet people where they're at and in order to build a strong movement.
Yeah, you definitely want people to feel valued and heard before, understand what's happening before you kind of make an ask there. I see what you're saying with that. Also, just quickly, yeah, welcome, Karen. See you're connecting here. It's great to have you. But yeah, this is kind of the last thing we're doing here before a 5-minute break, and I think we've got some great stuff labeled down here. So if everybody wants to take 5, and we will meet back here at 7 o'clock. Yeah, go stretch and grab some water, whatever you need, and we'll see you here at 7 o'clock.
All right, glad we could have that little break there. We got just a few more terms and concepts we're digging into, just as we were before, and hoping to have some good discussion around ways to work it. So with that, I will pass it to Sarah.
So we get to talk about addressing interpersonal issues within teams. We're obviously working with people who are very different from us, so interpersonal issues and conflicts are going to be inevitable. There's a lot of opposing viewpoints, some maybe differently perceived goals. So we're going to kind of try to work through those things and maybe reframe conflict a little bit so it's less like scary and bad and something that we aim for doing in a positive way. So our commitment, the first one, doing our best to address issues in a respectful and productive way. Pretty easy, pretty straightforward. The second one, to accept harm when we have caused it, even when we didn't mean to. That one is a little trickier. If someone comes up to us and says, look, something you said really hurt me, or something you did was really harmful, that sucks. That hurts us. We never want to hurt other people. So hearing that is really hard. So sometimes what we tend to do is get defensive. We point fingers and say, well, you did this first. Or we try to explain it away. We say, well, I didn't mean to, that wasn't my intention. But if you're really hurting, hearing someone say it wasn't their intention isn't going to make it better. So what we can do instead is we can listen to their experience, we can acknowledge and validate their feelings, we can genuinely and sincerely apologize for the hurt that we caused, and then we get to learn from it and we get to move on in a way where we now know not to say that or do that, because it can hurt people, again, even if you didn't mean to. So how do we go about having conflicts? I was a communication studies major in college. And when we first started talking about conflict, I was like, wow, I'm incredible at conflict. I either never have it, or when I do, I just do whatever I can to make the other person feel better. And really fast, they were like, okay, so you're avoiding and you're accommodating. And I found out that's actually bad, because I was protecting other people at the expense of my own feelings and my own needs. So I was like, okay, maybe I'm actually going to have to start having conflicts, but how do I do that? Like, how do I do that in a respectful way without hurting anyone? So I found these I feel statements, and these are such a good tool for bringing up feelings or grievances with people in a way that is easy to be heard. So we're going to start with I feel. And when we do this, we center our feelings because that's what we are in control of. If we just point fingers and blame and say, you always do this or you never do this, the other person might lash out, they might get defensive, and it's not going to be super productive. So instead, we're going to start with I feel. Then we move on to when, and this is where you list a super specific behavior or a situation, circumstance. You don't want to do big umbrella terms. You don't want to list a bunch of things. You want to keep it super precise. And then because, you list why it makes you feel that way. And then you talk about your needs. What can the other person do in the future to help the situation? So I could say, for example, Chelsea, I feel frustrated when our check-ins don't start on time because it makes me feel like you don't value my time. And in the future, I would love it if you would let me know when you are running late. And this is my feeling, an exact thing, why I'm feeling it, and what I need to move on. This is completely hypothetical. Chelsea is so good at starting on time. And if not, she'll text me and say I'm running late. And I'll say, no worries, LOL, but not in an avoidant way, in a I'm probably running late too kind of way. But it's just a nice little example. And this tool can be really helpful for conflicts with your partner or your friends or family, or again, in those teams that you're working with. So there are obviously going to be some challenges around conflict. The first being that it's hard to get people to see conflict as an opportunity and lean into those restorative conversations. Conflict is not fun and it's super uncomfortable, but it's super important for being able to move on. If you are just kind of not addressing it, you're building up resentment, you're letting things snowball, it's just going to get worse, and the team dynamic is going to suffer as a result. So you want to try to lean into those tough conversations and get some practice, kind of start getting into it. And also handling them in a time-sensitive manner is super hard, because if you react right away, right when it happens, the feelings might be a little tense. So sometimes you need to take a little minute to cool down, reflect, reevaluate, but you don't want to take too long that again, you're just pushing it off and things are getting worse. So you want to kind of try to navigate that, which can be kind of tricky. And on the next slide, what are we already doing about this? So we have a conflict resolution training. We have a policy and a process. So it's nice to kind of see it all written out in front of us to kind of see basically what the protocol is. What are we supposed to do in these situations? Because sometimes when you're flying blind, it can get a little tricky to navigate. So we can also hire a mediator if need be. If the conflict feels too big or feels like something that can't be solved just within the team, then we can bring in someone else. Again, having those courageous conversations, this is something that we try to do. Not fun, but we respect each other and ourselves and the work we're doing so much that we owe it to everyone to have those conversations, to be able to grow together. And owning doing harm, not fun. Again, none of this is fun if you're seeing a pattern. But if someone came up to me after the workshop and said, look, at something you said was really problematic or really hurtful, I wouldn't like to hear that, but I would just have to own it and say, I'm so sorry. I didn't realize that. I would do some learning, do some research, and do better in the future, because that's really all I can do. And we also do annual evaluations, which is not a time where we get to leave scathing reviews of our coworkers and air out all our grievances for the year. but it's more an intentional space to offer feedback and to receive feedback so that we can keep getting better year after year. So now I want to open it up to you guys to see if there's anything else that we can do and what that would need.
Yeah, Bonnie.
I just want to acknowledge and thank you for the I statements, and to just offer that I see them being very similar to the practice of nonviolent communication by Marshall Rosenberg, which then becomes a resource for people who want to go further with understanding each of those concepts.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm gonna have to look into that.
Actually, if you don't mind, just about to
Okay.
say that.
I can quickly put that in the chat if that would help. Whoops, my chat just disappeared. I actually, it's called the language of the heart. It's a big challenge, but worth learning. It takes practice. And there is a website. And they have CDs. Marshall is no longer with us, but they have CDs as well of that work.
Matt, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I just think that, you kind of addressed this a little bit, but that, I think there's a stigma out there that all kind of conflict or confrontation is on some level like aggressive or violent, or like there's some sort of, aggression behind it. And I think that breaking down that wall of like saying, like, I feel this way, I'd like to build as a result of this conversation that we're having, and coming at it from that perspective is huge. And I think that if everybody thought that way, then you would never come to those moments like you're talking about where things kind of snowball or boil over. But getting past that initial stigma of being afraid of it because everyone thinks that it's gonna explode in some type of way, I think it's just coming from the way that you approach it.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thank you guys for that discussion, and I hope that you'll be taking I statements with you. I surely am practicing them as well. So now we are going to go back to Chelsea.
Thank you. And seeing what you put in the chat there, John, we are going to have time for questions at the end too. So if we don't answer it in the chat now, just know we'll keep note on that as we go along. So you got really good ones in there. Okay, thank you, Sarah. So moving on to our second to last area concept, so to speak, is really what we're thinking of as just the broad strokes of inclusive organizing. I know that's what we're talking about tonight as a whole too, but trying to get a little bit more specific here, and hopefully this will make more sense in a moment. Our commitment to inclusive organizing is very similar to what I said at the beginning of tonight's workshop. We have to ground down, uphold, and reinforce time and again, intentional, inclusive practices. And that means, learning and unlearning, seeing blind spots, leaning into conflict, things that we've touched on in different ways tonight. But we just have to build that diverse, intersectional, and resilient climate justice movement. It's the only way we can really expect to, stand up against the powers and forces of money interests, the fossil fuel industry, and other systems based on extraction and oppression. So, a couple important things I should say to point out here under challenges. One of my favorite terms is really talking about moving at the speed of trust, and which trust is built and earned, right? Volunteerism as a whole is something that has often been entrenched in communities in which you have enough privilege to do that, right? You can work for free and really have space to still live comfortably. And as much as, volunteerism is going nowhere, a grassroots movement, it's a little different than just traditional volunteerism. It's people showing up in the more authentic ways with their leadership and ideas and needs, right? Whereas oftentimes volunteerism is framed around one person, one set of organization needs. Take care of all these stray animals until they get adopted. It's a beautiful, lovely mission. But building a grassroots movement so that we shift the powers of our elected officials and industries, that's going to take something so much more dynamic and malleable, right? Because inclusive organizing is going to change as we go along as well. And it must, quite frankly, because we're not probably collectively across the globe quite there yet, but we're getting there. So one other important point is really being able to push against those tenets of white supremacy culture. And one of those, most importantly, being that sense of urgency that you see here. This one is so tough, right? The climate crisis is a timed test. It's not just a test. We have to figure it out sooner than later to avoid the worst impacts. But that does not mean that we should abandon what it means to slow down and take care of ourselves so that we can take care of each other in our community and not burn out. And reshape how our society thinks about productivity. It feels really important to do that. And the last challenge there just being, we've said it a couple times tonight, we're going to have blind spots sometimes, unintentionally, even with the best laid plans and hopes. And if we're informed of, for example, changes that need to take place before an event or an action or something in order to make it more inclusive, we may or may not have the means to respond fast enough, but we're going to remain committed to trying, and that's for sure. Having a strong interconnected network of leaders and resources and organized resources will help us hopefully respond in real time when those moments again kind of arise. So with that, some examples of this work, not an exhaustive list here, but we really try to be providing an array of opportunities for people to be involved. We are a statewide nonprofit, right? We're a statewide movement. We want all of Colorado to win and succeed. So we have to strike that balance between online things like this and in-person things where people need that human connection. And that might connect back to what we talked about earlier, removing barriers to participation. To connect in person, we want to provide some good food and maybe some fun and maybe some carpooling, organizing, who knows? Whatever we need to figure out, we will try. So another example here is really doing our best to work collaboratively in coalition as much as possible. So much of our work is running parallel with so many other incredible organizations and movements here in the state. And the more that we can work together to really identify shared goals and opportunities, we're just going to maximize those resources. We're going to maximize the group mind. We're going to be an actually more inclusive movement altogether, since we're all working towards a future that is good for all of us and healthy for all of us and 7 generations to come. So last note here is just really considering equity and people's needs and then doing our best to providing. I've kind of touched on this as well as some others here this evening, so I won't belabor this one too much, but this really does mean bringing that lens to what we're doing. The way we plan this workshop, the way we plan our 2024 strategic plan. Yeah, the way we go about everything we're doing. So there are different tools that we have in our tool belt that can support with that equity lens and really being able to meet that. Another example could be providing sound system, voice amplification at an event, actively asking for feedback to make sure we get it right. Yeah. So what else can we do? What is coming to mind for folks? Because this is, like I said, a pretty broad category. There's a lot more we could say. It's that great resource in the chat. Thank you, Jan. Definitely copy that in the resource list. Yeah, Bonnie.
I just wonder, is there a statewide alliance of climate-oriented organizations? And if there isn't, I really see that as a high need. And for instance, I'm thinking of Green Faith, at least Green Faith Boulder. And, you know, there are different people who are doing, you know, climate organizing work. Like there's a woman, Tiffany Boyd, who has classrooms for climate action.
Yeah, I know Tiffany. Awesome. I think the short answer is yes. There are a number of statewide alliances. One notable one that you've maybe heard of as well is the Colorado Coalition for a Livable Climate, the CCLC. And I'll put them in here as well. Anyone else here, please jump in too, because I know there's a number of them, and maybe that's a point to be made too. Is there a way to condense it down to one super alliance, one super group? Yeah, anyone else? Other groups around this?
Yeah, I think you're right, Chelsea. There are a few different types of coalitions, and Colorado Coalition for a Livable Future is one that came to my mind. I put the web address in the chat for anyone who wants to check it out. There's also COCAN, which I think is more local governments. That's Colorado Coalition for Climate Action, I believe. And some others too. And then there's sort of kind of coalitions that have a different, maybe a different name, different focus, but it's very much a part of climate action, like the Ozone Coalition. And the great thing about reducing ozone pollution is that it also reduces greenhouse gas emissions. So kind of co-benefits there.
Question, Bonnie. And I'll spell these acronyms out further. Anyone else welcome here? Yeah, Jan.
Hi. So there's the Interfaith Alliance, and I just found, and I live in Colorado Springs, and I just found out that they have a person down here now, which is great, but they're very active in Denver. Green Faith, Faith Table, Together Colorado, and then those that you already mentioned. And I guess one of the things for me and 350.org is I'm working with a church down in Colorado Springs that is trying to develop other faith alliances to, as we become a creation justice church through the United Church of Christ, and start doing things that are more legislative and active. And as I am grateful for all these different groups, and it is really, I haven't figured out how to build alliances with the groups that would help our congregation then, who want to get involved in legislation, or who want to get involved in housing, who want to get involved in some of these greater community efforts, is how to do that most effectively. So I love the fact that you've brought this inclusive organizing up, Chelsea, and your whole team, because I think those of us who are working with groups of people, like some of the churches who have a creation justice or something similar going on, that's a lot of voices to be able to bring to the table. And how do we do that? So mine's more of a question, and as I'm walking around seeing all these great groups, how do we become more effective with our voice? So thank you for bringing that question to the table. That's my question too.
Thank you. So many good points there. I would think, I guess a couple of things come to mind, especially because you said legislative action, I believe, policy, meeting with legislators. Yeah, that's right on the horizon, isn't it? Just in January. I would love to connect one-on-one with you, and I'm sure also any other teammates we have in this line of work, to get maybe, yeah, more intentional, right? Get to figuring out what are the barriers, what needs addressed, where can we play a part in a way that's meaningful and helpful. We have lots of things, lots of existing resources, but yeah, in order to really do, I think, the best kind of organizing, I think that one-on-one and that connection to make sure the springs is sewn in, right? Really create distributed power in as much as we can in the state. Yeah, let's connect. I have your email. I'm making a note to myself. That's maybe sometime early in the new year, and figure out priorities and a little bit of shared strategy, perhaps.
Thanks, Chelsea.
Yeah, thank you. Springs is a great place for that. Yeah, Bobby.
Thanks. I just realized that I made a mistake in describing the coalitions. So COCAN is actually short for Colorado Climate Action Now. And I'm going to put that link in the chat. That's a little bit different than the other group I mentioned, Colorado Communities for Climate Action, which is the local governments group. So yeah, suffice to say, there's a lot of different coalitions, and it can be a little confusing, and more coordination would be wonderful.
Yeah, good call. We'll copy that in here and capture that. And try to break down those acronyms, which I might add as an example to work, because that is something we often try to do. That way people don't get lost in the process, and that insider jargon that can feel exclusive, right, too, and push people out. We don't want that. Good call. And I see what you shared in the chat there, Karen, too. That's spot on. Yeah, getting specific, right? Every group, every organization, every individual is going to need slightly different things. So being flexible and malleable to that is really important for good organizing. So, all right, well, I am going to keep us moving along here. And this is really great. This is exactly what we were hoping for in terms of just good discussion and thinking about, yeah, all of these things that interfeed with one another. I'm going to be sharing here a little bit with Katessa, actually. And yeah, actually, Katessa, if you, I will pass it to you.
Okay. Yeah, Chelsea and I will be sharing about youth leadership and activism, and I'm going to drop this link again in the chat. I know we already talked about this last time, but the Youth Action Committee had a wonderful webinar about youth and activism, so this is your second reminder, if you haven't watched it, to watch it because it was great. And yeah, we talked a lot about disrupting privilege and addressing harm in the last webinar, and then went into more depth in the youth and activism webinar if you're interested in those topics.
Does anyone have any questions in this very quick fire recap around, yeah, things from last week? disrupting privilege, addressing harm. We kind of touched on it earlier, but well, much as we were discussing, here just a few moments ago, when it comes to youth leadership and activism, we remain committed to really just realizing this aspect of inclusive organizing. And we shared last week that youth are one of the most disproportionately impacted groups in the climate crisis, inheriting a future oftentimes that they don't get full access or participation or prioritization in. So we want to provide that space, that support, the resources that really ensures that youth leaders and activists are right up in there, right? Not taking marching orders from adults necessarily by any means, but bringing those solutions, advocating for them, storytelling, really ensuring that, they're bringing them their authentic selves, and that way they feel included and valued, hopefully. And there's a couple different challenges that come with this, aspect of inclusive organizing. One of them is simply timing, right? If we're talking about a high schooler, that's one schedule versus a college student, which has infinite variability. We cannot always be putting on events or opportunities or meetings in the middle of the day or really during school hours in that way, right? We have to be intentional to say after school, maybe early in the morning. We haven't played with that one a lot yet, so maybe we could see what that would look like. But youth, students, leaders, they have a variety of schedules too that they're following when it comes to all the extracurriculars, or sports, or jobs that they're in, right? Family commitments. So we got to meet people where they're at, as we said earlier. And as leaders go through school, they graduate middle school into high school or high school into college. That could involve them leaving the state, their priorities changing, things that are bound to happen, right? We know that's an aspect of youth leadership organizing. So how we can really work to ensure that we're continuing to develop new leaders, not putting too much on one or two people because they've been the most active, but really realizing that snowflake model of leadership is what we think of. And as I'm saying that, that's a resource I will link in the toolkit in the follow-up. So continuing to meet people where they're at, continuing to develop leaders across the state that can activate in the Youth Action Committee and beyond. And the last point I'll just touch on there is finding those preferred ways to communicate efficiently with folks, right? Email is not necessarily the best conduit for sharing information with a variety of youth leaders. We got plenty of those from school, I'm sure. So that means thinking about things like texting, calling, getting consent to do those things, of course, not giving out information without getting, permission. And just knowing that we have to be patient sometimes and reminders are helpful, but ultimately being available for folks at their schedule and availability is really important for inclusive organizing. That way it's not so one-sided, right? So moving into this last piece here, we've touched on a couple different examples of this. And big shout out to Katessa here as being on the executive board and being one of the older youth leaders, I should say, right? About to age out of what we call a youth leader as 24 and under, or having aged out, sorry, if that's the case, but.
I'm still in the 24 range.
Yeah. In addition to other youth leaders in the space, that really has, I think, helped set a new tone for how we're showing up for our inclusive organizing and living our principles here. Really proud that YAC, Youth Action Committee, developed and implemented their first strategic plan. It was this time last year that they were writing it. It was implemented last year. And it led to a variety of cool things, like the Youth and Activism webinar Katessa shared on earlier. So heading into the new year, there's a lot of collaboration. Shout out to Sarah here in the Northern Colorado team when it comes to developing and implementing more shared strategy. Making sure YAC is not a siloed entity within the organization, but that there is cross-pollination, cross-communication, mutual support, and activation, right? We can't expect things to go smoothly without that. Sorry, I didn't mean to skip us ahead. So what else can we do to really move the needle here on youth leadership and activism? What would it need to in order to do that? Yeah, Matt.
I feel like with the youth in particular, there are a lot of barriers in the sense that, like, at a younger age, at least speaking from my personal experience, I remember that like a lot of events I'd attend, had some sort of food and whatnot like that. But that's not the real point I'm trying to make here. I think the main thing is that trying to come at it from a perspective of this is something that we can do that's important and urgent, but trying to communicate that message in a way that doesn't strike fear into the youth. Because I think that fear-based action turns people away, especially younger people away, because you don't know what you can do or if there's anything you can do. And I think that coming at it from that other perspective of this is urgent and this is important, but also that this is a growing space and there are a lot of awesome people that can help you and enable you to do what's going to be the best and most productive.
I think, yes, sorry. I think that listening to youth is really, really important. I have, in my experience with working with youth and listening to some ideas that were thrown around at our youth climate conference, they're just as knowledgeable about what is going on in the world and having these conversations as we are, in my opinion. I've heard them throw around terms that I didn't know about until I got to my graduate program. So I think listening to them and knowing that and trusting that they understand what's going on is really important.
Yeah, very true. Sierra?
Yeah, I just kind of want to echo what Katessa just said. I'm 28, so it's been a little while since I've been perceived as a high schooler or a college student. But I had that experience where I felt like I was being dismissed because of my age when I was younger. And now having experienced the other side of that where more times than not, I'm taken a little bit more seriously. It's a little bit crazy because I was somebody who loved researching these issues and took them very seriously even when I was younger. So it was difficult to want to keep up that momentum and show up to groups like that when I felt like I wasn't being included.
Really good point. Yeah, Anna?
Sometimes I get really frustrated that our school system doesn't seem to want to promote student leadership. And I often advocate for a leadership class, like a requirement that all kids take a leadership class, just to get them to strengthen their voice. And so then I go to, well, where would be the power there that says our district has to give kids these opportunities to develop their leadership skills? And so then talking about communicating across specialties and getting the Department of Education involved and advocating there that schools need to do more to bring out kids' voices and to empower kids and give them, I say kids, and that's probably very disrespectful, but young adults, or even young people who aren't even called young adults, like middle school kids, or even to plant this idea of leadership in little kids, and just making it the norm that kids are, or people are, very, very important. And it starts, whenever you can have a voice. So just trying to reach across different aspects of Colorado and get them to I'm thinking specifically of the Department of Education, to look into that. Like, what if all kids were required to take a climate class before they graduated as a term of graduation? Because I think it's really limited what kids have to take. They have to score maybe on an SAT, or there's different ways to show that they have attained some sort of knowledge, and they have to take maybe one other class. But what if we were to say we want every kid in the state or even the world to take an environmental class? So just trying to get more people to buy into empowering young people.
That is a fresh idea. I love it. My brain started running, and I added those notes around funding partnership type priorities, like you said, between the Department of Education and maybe others, but that this could be a really cool campaign within movement building, ultimately, that we do. I love that. That's great. And there's some great things in the chat there too. So really, really loving that. I'll add one thing here before we scooch on. That another kind of aha moment that occurred to me in the last year or so, really, and it might have came from that For Our Future youth conference that Katessa mentioned that YAC put on last year. But really considering and pausing, at least, to consider why I need to include the word youth when I'm describing an activist. It's not a pretty equitable practice that I'm talking about old activists or middle-aged ones or teenage, whatever, right? So where could I challenge myself and just use other descriptors or just drop it flat out? Unless that person says, no, it's totally fine. That sounds, you can totally describe me that way. That was a good moment for me. Yeah, John?
Yeah, just on that line, I posted in the chat room about service learning, which was my field of work for many years. And I was working with the indigenous group called the National Indian Youth Leadership Project. And their mission was to get Native youth to be leaders in their communities, which were tribal. I mean, there was the Zuni and Laguna and Taos and Acoma, and California has all sorts of little tribes, and Alaska has tribes. I mean, they're all over. And their effort, again, was to engage the Native youth in service learning that was being promoted by schools. And to the Indian perspective, service learning was an element of traditional education, and it was a way of connecting the community with the child. And so there was no school, but it was like a direct passport to get the kids engaged. And it was part of the traditional culture. And the National Youth Leadership Conference in Minnesota is a leader of this effort, and they have a conference every year. It moves around the country. I think it should come to Colorado. I mean, why not? It's like, that's how youth get their sense of purpose in school, saying you can make a difference. You don't have to grow up and become somebody. You are a leader. I mean, that's leadership to me of the best order, because they can engage the community to be part of this educational system. It's a bridge that doesn't get lifted very high. I mean, it's there, and people say, oh yeah, we're doing service. We have a 20-hour requirement for graduation, but it's not. And it's undersold. And it's like, if education needs to change, that could be a pathway that 350 Colorado could help deliver on, to say, oh yeah, let's get young people not just educated to go be working in a factory or doing the things that, whatever, math, science, it's all driven by something that's economic, and it's not ecological. It's like, where do you deliver an ecological consciousness? And kids have to get it. They don't learn it when they go to work for, I'm not going to say who they are, but they're very dangerous companies out there. And they're promoting their interests, which surrounds the almighty dollar. And, I'm sorry, but money isn't everything, but it seems to be becoming everything in our society. That's the heart of it. And service learning needs to be promoted in the educational system as a way to transition away from doing everything for money. If I can say it that way, I don't know.
I can say, at least from personal experience, service learning courses in the past I took in undergrad were really fulfilling. I'm sure that's not always the experience, but if it's done well and with intentionality, yeah, brilliant idea.
And CU Boulder and CSU both have service learning programs. But then you get out to the school districts and they're just feeling their way. It's like, this group in Minnesota, I'd love to see Colorado become an embracer of engagement for learning and for shifting our consciousness from going to Mars, if you will, to living on Earth.
Yeah. I will add that in the section here. We'll move on after this, but yeah, Jan.
I just wanted to add one more thing, and I think it was John who was just speaking. I think I'd like to hear if you check this out, but this course from ULab at MIT that I put in the chat, I just started it. My friend who has been educated and works in systems theory has been asking me to take that course for a long time. And it's a whole vision of, like what you're saying about corporate America, or I think all of us know somewhere in ourselves that the system, the systems that are cannot last. And so this course on MIT really talks about that and raising leaders. And that's why I think it's maybe something that youth, as well as all of us that are even older, look at, to be able to see what's really happening through a different lens that I think also will help us build better leaders. And like I said, I just started the course, but I just suggest you take a look and listen to the first 2 videos. It's free right now, and it's at your own pace, and you have access for, I think, at least until May, when they do another live course. So this one's, and it's all over the world. People have participated in this course. So just take a look, and if it resonates, great. Thanks for taking that.
Your generosity there too. Everyone's dropping resources, all kinds of good things there. We're gonna capture it all. Okay, great. Well, I'm going to, with that, thank you everyone again. I'm gonna pass it to Bobby and Sierra here for pretty much our last activity for tonight.
All right. So for our last activity, we're going to try a couple of breakout rooms. So in just a minute here, we'll move into 2 groups to discuss these 2 questions. What are other groups in the movement doing to be inclusive? And I know we've already had some ideas popping up along the way, but really want to dig into any examples that you all have that you've seen in other organizations or in other parts of the movement. And then what can we learn from that? Learn from other parts of the movement, other organizations, other examples of inclusivity. Now, to do this discussion, we're going to try a tool that's called a Jamboard. And this is kind of like a whiteboard or a chalkboard to use in the virtual space. So I'm going to share my screen here for just a moment so everybody gets a sense of what it looks like. All right, do you need to transfer that to me, Chelsea? Okay, I think I can do it now. Okay, so Jamboard looks like this, like a big whiteboard, and it has some tools on the left-hand side. Is it looking really small for you guys? I want to zoom in a bit. Maybe not that far. On the left-hand side, there's different tools, but the best tool for this exercise is the sticky note tool. Just like putting a sticky note on a board on a wall, you can type anything you want into the sticky note. So I'll put like example number 1, and then I hit save and cancel to close out my sticky note tool. And there's my little yellow sticky note, and I can grab it with my cursor and move it around. I can put it under that first question about what others in the movement are doing to be inclusive, or I can move it over here about if it belongs under that question of what can we learn from it. And then if you want to do another sticky note, you go to that sticky note tool on the left-hand side and do another one. And you can pick a color. You can make it pink or orange or green, whatever you like. Example number 2. And there it is. And I didn't spell it right, but that doesn't matter because it's just an example. And then I can select it and delete it if I want. Now, if you are not liking the Jamboard, don't want to mess with it, totally okay, because your facilitators here can capture your additions and add them to the Jamboard for you. You can also put your ideas in the chat or just speak them out into the breakout room. So there's a lot of options, but we wanted to try out this nifty tool and sort of demonstrate it so that you all can take it with you into other contexts where it might make sense to try something like a Jamboard. So we're going to go into 2 groups, I believe. And how long do you think we'll have in our groups? Chelsea, like 5-10 minutes? What?
I'll say 5 feels right.
Okay. And we'll discuss these questions, get our answers captured, and then we'll all come back here together into the big group to close out for the evening.
I have the rooms open, so hopefully my co-hosts can see this okay. Yeah, we'll get you sorted into one of these 2 rooms, and we'll see you back here in just a few minutes. Little prompts. Almost there. Yeah, everyone has been assigned, so you should have like a prompt that came up to let you accept it. Yeah, Sierra, you're welcome to join where you want. Contest the same. Karen, we have you to room 2 if you, I guess we can move you there. Should be. Okay, room 1. You should have a prompt, Karen, in order to do that. Excellent. I see those items in the chat there too. Okay. Well, yes, as it comes to moving forward, as we wrap up this month, this year, and into big things, we have a couple simple next steps for you and invitations, right? Not things you're forced to do. But we will, of course, follow up with resources, the recordings, the slides. But we invite you to be a part of our strategic plan development, which is still coming together, especially all those tactics and strategies. And a lot of what was shared tonight fits into that. So I thank you for already thinking ahead on this. The volunteer email is a great one to reach out to if you have any questions about anything. And the movement building committee meeting is that ongoing dedicated space every other month where we can come together as a broad movement and focus in our Jedi work issues, as well as youth leadership and activism, climate wellness and resiliency, a number of other things. So if you're looking for a regular connective space and community to be a part of, I invite you to go to our website and you'll find our information there. And yeah, just keeping an eye on upcoming trainings and opportunities. If this was something that you enjoyed and found valuable and useful, we're going to be expanding on the topics that have to do with justice, equity, diversity, right? We've taken that dive on inclusion tonight, and we couldn't have went there without your help and insight and passion and vulnerability. So thank you for the 3 extra minutes. We won't take a minute more. I'll just say, yeah, have a lovely, wonderful evening and safe and healthy holiday season in the ways you celebrate. We, yeah, wish you all very well until we're seeing you again. Thanks so much, everyone. Thank you, Alejandro. Muchas gracias. Thank you, Bonnie, so much. We appreciate it.